Imagine a metal so rare, so inert, that it sat for decades in a forgotten African mine, considered a mere impurity, a colorful dust in the veins of a far more valuable ore. Then, in the span of a single year, this colorful dust became the most consequential substance on Earth, the key to unlocking a power capable of ending the greatest war in history, or plunging the world into an eternal nightmare. The fate of the entire planet, the very definition of the future, hinged on a few thousand tons of reddish-black rock hidden 6,000 miles from American shores, guarded by silence and protected by a lie. Chapter 1. The Weight of 2,000 Tons. New York City, April 1940. The air in the modest wood-paneled office on the 42nd floor of a lower Manhattan skyscraper was thick with tobacco smoke and a tension that had nothing to do with Wall Street. Outside, the city was a symphony of blaring horns and rattling rivets, the brassy, unrelenting soundtrack of a nation still grappling with the tail end of the Great Depression, but determinedly looking forward. Inside, there was only the cold dread of a world slipping backwards. The man seated behind the heavy mahogany desk was Edgar Senjay, a Belgian engineer with the reserved demeanor of a banker and the unflappable nerves of a field general. His eyes, though tired, held a keen, assessing intelligence. He was the managing director of the Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, or UMHC, a name that, to the vast majority of the world, meant only copper and cobalt, metals that lubricated the engines of industry. But to Senjay, UMHC meant something else entirely: Shinkolobwe. Shinkolobwe was a remote, blisteringly hot mining concession in the Belgian Congo, a place of unimaginable wealth in strategic minerals. And it was the only place in the world where high-grade pitchblende, the reddish-black primary ore of radium and, by extension, uranium, was mined commercially in such staggering quantity. Senjay was alone but for a worn map pinned to the wall, its vast shadowed expanse marked with the outlines of Africa and Europe. A red pin glimmed ominously over a tiny dock in Belgium, Brussels. Only 3 weeks had passed since the Wehrmacht had bypassed the formidable Maginot Line and flooded across the Low Countries, shattering the illusion of Belgian neutrality. King Leopold III was captive. Belgium was occupied. And with Belgium, the administrative part of UMHC and the fate of its invaluable holdings in the Congo had fallen into Nazi hands. Senjay, who had been on a routine business trip to New York at the time of the invasion, was now stranded. He was a corporate monarch without a kingdom, presiding over a global empire from a single rented office, an exile with a secret that could determine the outcome of the war. The secret was not just the mine itself, but the literal weight of its product already moved. 2 years earlier, in 1938, on a gut instinct and a few alarming scientific papers about atomic fission that barely anyone else took seriously, Senjay had given a fateful order. He had directed his engineers in Shinkolobwe to ship the vast majority of their high-grade, refined uranium ore, material that had been a simple byproduct of their radium operations, out of the Congo and across the Atlantic. The destination? A massive, anonymous warehouse on Staten Island, New York. He had acted on no official government request, nor any binding military directive. He was a businessman acting purely on the cold, calculated risk that this useless heavy element would soon become a critical strategic asset. That the strange theories of men like Otto Hahn, Lise Meitner, and Frédéric Joliot-Curie might, against all odds, prove terrifyingly true. Now, as the news from Europe grew darker by the hour, that gamble felt less like a risk and more like prophecy. Sanjay rose and paced the length of his office. The weight of his burden was tangible. 1,250 tons, that was the exact figure. 2.5 million pounds of the purest uranium ore, stockpiled under a flimsy roof in America, completely unknown to the U.S. government, to the U.S. military, and most dangerously to the American intelligence services, which were still sluggishly forming. The sheer volume was almost paralyzing. To the Nazis, who were already launching their own nascent atomic research program, this stockpile was a prize of incalculable value. If they learned of its location, the geopolitical consequences would be instant and devastating. Sanjay's immediate crisis was twofold. Protect the Staten Island stockpile. He had to bury the secret deeper than the ore itself. The warehouse was guarded by private security, not soldiers. Any official inquiry, German, American, or otherwise, would blow his cover. Secure the Congo mine. The Shinkolobwe mine, the source, was still operational. While the best ore was gone, a sizable amount of lower grade, yet still usable material remained, and the Germans now controlled the Belgian government that officially ran the company. If they took direct control, the taps could be turned back on. Sanjay reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, carefully folded letter. It was dated September 1940. He had written it himself, but had not yet decided whether to send it. It was addressed to Vannevar Bush, the chairman of the newly formed U.S. National Defense Research Committee, or NDRC. Sanjay's finger traced the words. I am writing to inform you that I have on hand in New York 1,250 tons of uranium ore and a further 3,000 tons in Africa. Should your government ever require this material for experiments with a view to national defense, it is available. He knew the letter was a bombshell. It was the only ethical move, yet it was also the ultimate surrender of his secret. He was a Belgian patriot, but his primary duty was to his shareholders and to humanity. He could not, in good conscience, risk this power falling into the hands of the Axis. The time was not yet right. America was still officially neutral, still stubbornly isolated. Sanjay folded the paper back up. Patience. The world would soon realize it was in a fight for its very survival, and then, and only then, would the Americans be ready to accept the gift, or the curse, of Shinkolobwe. Washington, D.C., December 1941. The day after the attack on Pearl Harbor felt less like a day, more like a permanent shift in gravity. The stunned shock had rapidly calcified into a ferocious, unifying rage. America was at war. It was in this atmosphere of wartime mobilization that Colonel Kenneth D. Nichols, a brilliant young engineer in the Army Corps of Engineers, was pulled into a clandestine world he never knew existed. His expertise was in infrastructure, logistics, and building mammoth projects under intense pressure. Now, he was being tapped for something far grander and infinitely more mysterious. Nichols was summoned not to the Pentagon, but to a converted office suite in a nondescript government building. The man who greeted him was General Leslie Groves, an imposing, mercurial, and notoriously demanding officer who had just successfully overseen the construction of the Pentagon itself. Groves was a builder of mountains, and he was about to be put in charge of building the impossible. Nichols, Groves said, dispensing with pleasantries as he gestured toward a thick, locked binder on his desk. You're cleared for this. Don't look at me that way. You're going to be a colonel in the Corps, you'll report only to me, and you'll run the operations that keep this entire project fed. Do you know what the project is? Nichols, trim and impeccably military, simply replied, Sir, I know only that it involves the separation of isotopes and large-scale industrial plants. The project name is the Manhattan Engineer District, or MED. Groves cracked a thin smile. The MED, yes. a lovely bureaucratic smokescreen. Nichols, this project is to build a weapon, a single bomb that will end this war. We are harnessing the power of the atom." The words hung in the air, heavy and fantastical. Nichols, the practical engineer, felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Science fiction. Groves leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential near whisper. The entire damn thing, all the billion-dollar plants, all the PhDs, all the secrets, it all starts with uranium. We can't build the bomb without the fuel. And that, Colonel, is where you begin your job. You are going to be the quartermaster of the apocalypse. Groves then opened a folder containing a brief, typed memorandum that detailed an initial, highly secret. Groves then opened a folder containing a brief, typed memorandum. It detailed an initial, highly secretive contact that had taken place just weeks before Pearl Harbor. A tentative, almost unbelievable handshake between a small group of American scientists and a single nervous Belgian exile in New York. This man, Groves pointed to the name, is Edgar Sengier. He is the managing director of UMHK, and he is either the most brilliant businessman who ever lived or the unwitting shepherd of the most critical military asset in the world. The memorandum confirmed the incredible figure, 1,250 tons of high-grade uranium ore stored in a warehouse in Staten Island. The Germans don't know it's here. The British don't know it's here. Hell, the President of the United States didn't know it was here until about 2 weeks ago. Nichols, your first and most vital mission is to secure that stockpile. You will take possession of it in the name of the United States government, and you will move it somewhere absolutely impenetrable. We are calling the material tube alloy to throw off suspicion. The uranium is the ghost of the battlefield, and we must keep it a ghost. The astonishing discovery, the almost miraculous preemptive securing of the ore by a civilian, gave the American effort a 2-year head start over any rival power. The entire Manhattan Project was essentially built on Sengier's foresight. But the 1,250 tons, while vital, was not enough. The massive, energy-devouring plants that Nichols would soon build in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, would require a constant, colossal supply. That brings us to the second half of the problem, Groves continued, picking up the map. The source, Shinkalabwe, Belgian Congo. Sengier has a further 3,000 tons of slightly lower-grade ore in Africa. And the mine itself, Nichols, the mine itself is in occupied territory. Technically, the mine belongs to a company whose directors are under the thumb of the Reich. The challenge was unprecedented. An American military operation to purchase, secure, and transport thousands of tons of material from a colonial territory whose home country was occupied by the enemy, all while maintaining absolute secrecy. It was a logistical and diplomatic nightmare. The Germans want it. The British want it. Our allies, the Belgians in exile, are desperate to sell it to us, but they have to pretend they can't. You will need to make a deal with Sengier, circumventing every legal and ethical boundary that gives us a near monopoly on the world's supply. We need the Ghost Fleet to sail from the Congo. Nichols leaned back, absorbing the gravity of his new role. The weight of the world, he realized, was not carried by men in the field with rifles, but by the scientists and engineers who had to find the material that would make their fighting possible. The quartermaster of the apocalypse had his orders. Leopoldville, Belgian Congo, May 1942. The heat in the Congo was a suffocating, visceral presence, a wet blanket of steam and jungle decay. In the capital of Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, the atmosphere was one of stifled colonial dread. The administration was loyal to the Belgian government in exile in London, but their resources were pitifully stretched. and German U-boats were making the Atlantic crossing a terrifying gamble. Dr. John J. Eby, or Jack Eby, was the man on the ground, a civilian geologist and engineer from the United States. Eby arrived in the Congo under the flimsiest of cover stories, an agent for the U.S. Board of Economic Warfare, purchasing strategic minerals, copper, cobalt, anything but uranium. His true mission was to become the clandestine eyes and ears of the Manhattan Project in Africa. Eby's primary contact was Jules Cousin, the director of UMHK operations in the Congo. Cousin was a tough, pragmatic colonialist who understood the stakes. He had overseen the initial shipment of the 1,250 tons, and he personally knew the exact location of the remaining 3,000 tons of refined ore. This 3,000-ton cache, known within the inner circle simply as the Katanga stockpile, was stored not in an open warehouse, but deep inside the mountains near the mining district of Katanga, concealed in a labyrinthine network of adits and tunnels. Eby's mandate from Colonel Nichols was simple, if nearly impossible. Secure the stockpile, buy the 3,000 tons from UMHK, arrange for its clandestine transport to the Atlantic coast, and load it onto a waiting ship, a ghost ship, in the port of Lobito, Angola, and then cross a U-boat-infested Atlantic. The entire operation was given a code name so bland and innocuous that no spy would ever look twice. Operation Manhattan. The uranium was referred to on all shipping manifests as cobalt-bearing residue. The first rail shipment began 3 weeks later. Each load of ore was encased in thick, anonymous burlap sacks and loaded onto flatbed rail cars, strategically hidden between cars filled with legitimate, non-military cargo, like copper ingots and palm oil. The train moved at night, its cargo the single most valuable freight in the world. Yet outwardly, it was nothing more than another routine colonial train, pulling its load from the heart of Africa to the sea. The fate of 2 continents now lay with an American geologist, a Belgian colonial director, and a train rattling silently through the jungle, carrying the weight of the coming atomic age.